My husband spent our son's college fund on his affair, so I took it all back. I used to believe my husband was a good man, a little selfish sometimes, maybe a little careless with money, but never someone who would outright betray his family. Turns out I was wrong, very wrong. We had been married for 16 years. We had a son together, a bright, hard-working kid who had spent his whole life dreaming of going to college. And like any good parents, we had been saving for that future since the day he was born. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make sure he wouldn't have to struggle the way we had, enough to give him the opportunities we never had growing up, or at least, it had been enough, because my husband, my selfish, cheating husband, had drained the account behind my back. Every single dollar of our son's college fund, gone. And do you want to know what he spent it on? It wasn't a medical emergency. It wasn't some unavoidable disaster. No, he spent it on his mistress. Expensive hotels, lavish dinners, jewelry, plane tickets for romantic getaways with a woman half his age. He had taken money that we had saved for our son's future, money that we had both worked hard for, and used it to fund his disgusting affair. And the worst part, he didn't even try to hide it properly. I found out completely by accident. One evening I went online to check our finances like I always did. My husband had been acting off for a while, nothing major, but little things that didn't sit right, coming home later than usual, hiding his phone screen when I walked into the room, being weirdly defensive about money whenever I brought it up. I ignored it for months, chalked it up to stress, until that night when I logged into our joint account and saw that our son's college fund, the account we had spent 16 years building together, had been completely wiped out. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, maybe there was some sort of error. Maybe my husband had moved the money somewhere else for safekeeping, but as I clicked through the transaction history, my stomach dropped. Luxury hotel stays, 5-star restaurants, high-end clothing stores, and worst of all, plane tickets. Tickets for two. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, trying to process what I was seeing. My husband, the man I had trusted with my life, had taken our son's future and spent it on his mistress. And in that moment I made a decision. I wasn't just going to leave him. I was going to take everything. I sat in that chair for hours, staring at the evidence in front of me. My hands were shaking, not from sadness, but from pure rage. My son, our son, had worked so hard, had done everything right, and his own father had stolen the opportunities he had earned. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just started planning. The first thing I did was print everything. Every transaction, every charge, every message I could find. I didn't want a single piece of this to get lost. I made copies, stored them in multiple places. If my husband thought he could talk his way out of this, he was in for a rude awakening. Then I called a lawyer. I didn't tell my husband I knew, not yet. I kept playing my role, the loyal, oblivious wife, while I gathered everything I needed. I went through our joint finances with a fine-toothed comb, pulling every single piece of information I could find. And the more I dug, the worse it got. It wasn't just the college fund. He had borrowed against our house. He had taken out credit cards in both of our names. He had racked up tens of thousands of dollars in debt, all for some woman who wouldn't even look twice at him if he wasn't throwing money at her. And where was she now? Living in a luxury apartment he was paying for. I nearly laughed. This idiot had burned his entire life to the ground, and he didn't even know it yet. The lawyer was thorough, and when I showed her everything I had found, she sat back in her chair, shaking her head. "He's screwed," she said simply. I wanted to make sure of that. We worked out the perfect plan. First, I moved every bit of money I legally could into a separate account. My account. He had already spent most of it, but what was left, that was mine now. Then, I filed for divorce. But I wasn't going to serve him right away. Oh no. I wanted him to see it coming. I wanted him to panic, so I waited. I started dropping little hints just to watch him squirm, asking random questions about our finances, looking at him a little too long when he lied, making offhand comments about cheating husbands, losing everything in divorces. At first he didn't seem to notice, but then he started getting nervous. One night he casually asked, "Hey, you're not looking at our accounts or anything, right?" I smiled. "Why? Something you don't want me to see?" He laughed it off, but I could tell he was terrified. Good, because in just a few days I was about to serve him the biggest reality check of his life, and I couldn't wait to watch it happen. I wasn't stupid enough to confront him without a plan. If I had learned anything from his pathetic attempts at lying, It was that he would try to weasel his way out of it. Maybe he'd fake remorse, maybe he'd blame me for not being present enough, or maybe he'd turn it around and act like I was the problem. No, I wasn't going to give him the chance. I kept playing my role for another week. He thought he was still getting away with it. He still came home late, still hid his phone screen, still lied, straight to my face about his business meetings. I wanted to laugh every time he did it, knowing he had no idea what was coming. My lawyer and I had gone over everything. Every dollar he had stolen, every charge that could be traced back to him, every single financial crime he had unknowingly committed by taking out loans and credit cards in both of our names without my consent. Not only was I about to divorce him, but I was going to bury him in legal consequences. The best part? His dumbass had put the mistress on payroll at his company. Apparently, he had given her a fake consulting position so he could pay her without me noticing. I didn't even have to report it. His own company would handle that once they found out. And trust me, they would find out. Everything was lined up perfectly. Then came the fun part. I wanted to make sure he walked right into it, so I planned a little date night, just the two of us. I told him I missed spending time together, that we should go somewhere fancy. I even made a reservation at one of the very same restaurants he had taken his mistress to. He took the bait. That night I got dressed up, did my hair, acted like the perfect wife. He probably thought I was trying to win him back. I could see it in his smug little expression, the way he kept looking at me like he had me wrapped around his finger. We sat down, ordered drinks, and I let him talk about his stressful work week. I nodded along, pretending to be interested, waiting for the perfect moment. Then, when the drinks arrived, I pulled out the folder, thick, heavy, full of every single piece of evidence I had gathered. I slid it across the table to him. He frowned. "What's this?" "Open it." He did, and the moment he saw what was inside, his entire face changed. I watched, savored it. As he flipped through the bank statements, the receipts, the credit card transactions in both of our names, his hand started shaking when he got to the private investigator's report. Clear as day photos of him kissing his mistress, walking into hotel lobbies with her, holding her close like he hadn't stolen from his own family to afford it. What is this?" he stammered. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of my drink. "It's proof." He swallowed hard, eyes darting around as if someone might swoop in to save him. "I can explain." "No, you really can't." I pulled out one more document. The divorce papers, and placed them on top of the pile. "You're going to sign these. You're going to agree to every single term I've outlined, and if you fight me on any of it..." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. His mistress's home address popped up. His face drained of color. "What? What is that?" "Her address," I said sweetly. "And guess what? If you refuse to sign, I'll be paying her a little visit, and I won't be alone." I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough to make his stomach drop. "I wonder how her husband would feel knowing what she's been up to." His eyes widened. "Yeah." That's right, she was married, too. I had found out a few days earlier when I dug a little deeper. Her husband was some wealthy businessman, traveling all the time, completely unaware that his gold-digging wife was screwing another man with stolen money. My husband's breathing was uneven now. "You wouldn't?" "Oh, I absolutely would," I said. "So what's it gonna be?" He just sat there, stunned, completely wrecked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was scared. Good. Because he should be. He had nothing left. His money? Gone. The house? Mine. His reputation about to be destroyed. He looked down at the papers, then back at me. "This isn't fair." I smiled. Neither was stealing from our son. He knew he had no way out. So right there in the middle of that expensive restaurant where he had wined and dined his mistress, he signed the papers. I walked out without another word, left him sitting there, still reeling from what had just happened. I didn't wait for him to follow me, didn't care what he did next. He was already done in my book. The divorce moved fast. My lawyer made sure of it. Since I had proof of financial misconduct, I walked away with everything. The house? Mine. The savings he hadn't touched? Mine. His retirement fund? Half of it? Mine. And him? He got nothing. His company found out about the fake payroll scheme and fired him. His mistress? Dumped him the second she realized he was broke. And her husband? Oh, I paid him a little visit. But that's a story for next time. I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Getting my husband to sign the divorce papers was only step one. He thought I was finished, that he had hit rock bottom, that losing his money, his house, and his mistress was the worst it could get. He was wrong. Because now I was going to make sure he paid for what he did. Not just financially, but in a way that he'd never recover from. He had stolen our son's future. He had lied to me, humiliated me, and spent years thinking he was smarter than me. So I wasn't going to stop at taking everything he had, I was going to take his reputation too. And it all started with her husband. I had debated whether or not to get him involved. After all, my husband was already ruined. Did I really need to blow up this man's life too? But then I thought about it. This wasn't just some random woman my husband had cheated with. This was a married woman, someone who had been lying to her husband for just as long as mine had been lying to me, and he deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. So I paid him a little visit. I had done my research. It wasn't hard to figure out where he worked. He had a very public, very important job, the kind of job where image mattered. So instead of calling or sending an anonymous message, I decided to do things face to face. I walked into his office building, head held high, and asked the receptionist to speak with him. She gave me a weird look, probably wondering what business I had with one of the top executives in the company, but after a little bit of persuasion and a fake excuse about a family emergency, she let me through. His office was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, the whole deal. He barely looked up when I walked in, too busy typing something on his computer. "I don't take unscheduled meetings," he said. I set the folder down on his desk. "You're going to want to make an exception for this." He finally looked up, clearly irritated, but the second he saw what was inside, his entire face changed. Pictures, receipts, copies of bank statements, proof that his loving wife had been screwing my husband for months. At first he just stared at it, like his brain couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Then, slowly he picked up one of the photos, the one of them kissing outside of a hotel, and let out a breath. This isn't real," he muttered. I shrugged. "Believe what you want, but if I were you, I'd check her phone before she has the chance to delete everything." Silence. Then he set the paper down, straightened his tie, and nodded. "Thank you for bringing this to me." No anger, no yelling, just cold, calculated understanding. I had a feeling he was about to ruin her life in ways I couldn't even imagine, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I walked out of that office, went straight to my car, and drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. But the fallout? Oh, that was better than I ever expected. First, the mistress got kicked out. I don't know exactly what happened after he confronted her, but within a week she was out of their house and staying with a friend. Apparently, she had tried to play the victim, saying she had fallen out of love with her husband and that she had planned on telling him eventually. That didn't work. He filed for divorce immediately. And since they had no prenup, she was looking at losing half of everything. I wish I could have seen her face when she realized she had left a rich, successful man for someone who was now broke and unemployed. Because that's the other thing, my ex was still unemployed. After getting fired for his little payroll stunt, he had struggled to find another job. Word had gotten around, and no company wanted to hire someone who had committed financial fraud just to fund an affair. And with no job, that meant no money, no house, no way to keep up with the alimony payments he now owed me. I had won in every possible way, but the final blow? That came when our son found out. I had kept him out of it for as long as I could. I didn't want to drag him into the mess his father had created, but eventually he figured it out. He saw that his dad wasn't around anymore. He heard whispers from family members, and one day he sat me down and asked, "Mom, what really happened?" I told him the truth. No sugarcoating, no half-truths, just exactly what his father had done. And that was it. That was the moment my ex lost everything, because our son, his own flesh and blood, wanted nothing to do with him. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask to see him on weekends. When my ex finally worked up the courage to reach out, asking if he could explain, my son looked him dead in the eye and said, "You already did," and then he walked away. My ex still tried. He sent messages, left voicemails, begged me to fix things between them. But that wasn't my job. He was the one who had stolen from his own son, and now he was paying the price. My ex never really recovered. After my son cut him off, whatever fight he had left in him just disappeared. He had already lost his job, his house, and his money. His mistress had moved on the second she realized he wasn't some wealthy sugar daddy, but just a pathetic unemployed loser with nothing left to offer. And now, the one person who might have still loved him, his own son, wanted nothing to do with him. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was couch surfing for a while, staying with some distant relatives who felt sorry for him. He tried getting another job in his field, but his reputation followed him everywhere. No one wanted to hire the guy who had gotten caught committing fraud just to fund his affair. The best he could manage was some low-level gig that barely covered his bills, and he still had to send me alimony checks every month. I can only imagine how much it burned him to sign over a portion of his pathetic paycheck to me, knowing I was thriving while he was barely scraping by. Because I was thriving. The house was mine, fully paid off, my finances were in perfect shape, no longer tied to a reckless, selfish man who spent money like it grew on trees. And my son, he was still going to college. Because the second I found out what my ex had done, I had started working on fixing it. I had reached out to family, worked extra hours, and even contacted the school directly to see what options we had. And in the end, I made it happen. He got financial aid, scholarships, and enough money from me and other loved ones who stepped up when his father failed him. And my ex, he got to watch from the sidelines as his son went off to chase his dreams without him. He reached out one last time a few months after the divorce was finalized. It was a long, rambling email full of self-pity, talking about how he had made a mistake and how he never meant to hurt anyone. He said he regretted everything, that he missed me, that he missed our son. I read it, then deleted it without responding. Because at the end of the day he had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. I, on the other hand, I had taken everything back, and I never looked back.